Hello, welcome to the interview here on France 24. Well, my guest today is a man whose expertise is very much in demand in a world where horrific acts of violence are sadly all too common. Jean-Charles Brizard is an expert on terrorism and the ways terrorists raise the money they need to carry out their attacks. Now, he is also the author of what's regarded as the definitive study on the financial network of the Bin Laden organization, and he has also served as an investigator for the lawyers representing over 6,500 families who were victims of the 9/11 attacks in 2001. Thank you very much for being with me today.
Great.
I obviously want to talk about the recent shootings in Toulouse here in France and the implications of that. But I want to start with perhaps the obvious. You are a terrorism expert and a man who's an expert on the financing of terrorism. You got your start with a report in 1997 which basically linked Al-Qaeda to Islamic charities. And Jacques Chirac, the president at the time in France, gave that to George W. Bush, the findings of that study. I assume that's sort of where you got your start, but my question is, how do you start tracking and linking finances? How do you become a terrorism expert, essentially?
Okay. Before that study that you just mentioned, I was working with the chief prosecutor for anti-terrorist prosecutor here in Paris, Mr. Alain Marceau. And working with him gave me the not only the expertise, but the chance to research and investigate more deeply terrorism and its financing. Why it's financing? Because I had always the thought that that financing the terrorism was really at the root of terrorism. One of the main ways to accomplish such acts, such as 9/11 attacks, for example. And so I was provided the opportunity to work on the financing in 1997, which I did and updated until 2001. I became known in September 11 as the Al-Qaeda terrorism financing expert.
No one else was really doing this work back then?
At the time, not. So it was quite easy for me to become the expert because I was the only one.
And you testified, correct me if I'm wrong, before the U.S. Senate Banking Committee? You testified before the U.S. Congress?
I first testified before the Joint Committee of the Intelligence Committees of the Congress investigating the 9/11 attacks, and then later on before the U.S. banking.
But
committee.
why? And they trusted your information. I mean, didn't you have these American congressmen saying, "Who's this French guy telling us where Bin Laden's getting his money"?
Never, because again, the study I've done was based mostly on public or on information that could be trusted.
Public records.
Public records, essentially. I was linking things that were probably, for other reasons, never linked between themselves. And so, yes, I was heard by that commission, and then in June 2002, was retained by the lawyers representing 9/11 families in the United States.
And that's work that continues today. Now, obviously, we're going back 10 years. This is almost ancient history right now. Since then, as we all know, Osama bin Laden has been captured by U.S. Navy SEALs. It took 10 years to do it, and George W. Bush wasn't the one. It was Barack Obama. Why did it take them so long? Isn't it a matter, like you said, follow the money?
Well, this track was tried in the past to track bin Laden. It never worked. Remember that we were tracking one man, one lonely man, and indeed he was alone, as the raid on his house later proved. But meanwhile, terrorism was still there. It is still there through various affiliates of Al-Qaeda, and through individual jihadists.
And this brings us really up to the current day right now. The shootings in France that we saw this week, they have been described by Nicolas Sarkozy as terrorist acts. Perhaps an obvious question, do you regard these as terrorist acts? Do you regard this as the acts of just a lone madman who is acting on his own ideological whatever convictions?
No, I think it's definitely an act of terrorism.
Terrorism in the sense that it was perhaps arranged in the framework of a network.
Oh, okay, so that we don't know at that stage, okay? We just know that we have a self-radicalized person who was known for various petty crimes here in France, and then went in prison where he was more radicalized, and then he decided to travel to Waziristan to train himself.
To
That's
Pakistan,
what-
to the most
right.
dangerous area of the
Exactly,
world,
exactly.
perhaps.
We all know nobody can travel there by his own way and simply, knock at the door and say, "Well, I want to train here." This is impossible.
He was obviously helped.
You need a network to do so. And I hope that the investigation will clearly identify this network and the people that might have helped him in doing so.
You're the terrorist specialist, the expert here. How was it possible that this man was able to amass such an arsenal of weapons when he was on the list of French intelligence agencies? This was not an unknown character. They knew who he was. They were tracking him already.
Well, that question happens all the time, almost all the time here in Europe.
Here in Europe,
Here in Europe.
you're making a distinction with the United
Yes,
States.
yes, where the things are slightly different. But here in Europe, for example, remember the March 2004 Madrid bombings. Almost 90% of the men who committed those attacks were known. Some of them were under surveillance of the Spanish police only days before the attacks. So it's a recurrent question and a difficult question for us to answer within the framework of the state of law.
What do you do?
We cannot.
But what do you do about someone like this who is already on the U.S. blacklist as a
Yes.
terrorist?
He had never been convicted.
Okay.
Okay, he had never been convicted. He was not accused of anything to do with terrorism. Again, he was involved in
So they knew he had trained in Pakistan, but they had nothing concrete that they
Exactly.
could get him on.
And apparently, he managed to explain to the French intelligence that he was there for another purpose,
Right.
holidays.
So he misled them as well.
He misled them as well.
And I'm still, though, trying to get to this basic question of how he was able to slip below the radar. When you saw how this was handled, do you think that there were lapses in French intelligence, or do you say this was inevitable and this is going to happen inevitably?
This inevitably will happen, unfortunately, again, because we, in the again the framework of the state of law, have no mean to put these people under surveillance or to put them in jail or in another place while they are not convicted, and there's nothing that can be that they're not accused of terrorism.
Right.
Okay, this is a real issue. Now, for his travels to Pakistan, etc. Why did he manage to slip, and I mean to stay under the radar screens?
Exactly.
Because the first lessons that you learn there in training camps is not only to use firearms, make bombing devices, etc. Is you learn how to escape.
How to stay hidden, basically, from the
Exactly,
authorities.
exactly.
Let me just jump in. You advise, or you actually train French authorities on terrorist and terrorist financing issues. What would you say right now if you're sitting down with the French intelligence people and they're saying, Jean-Charles, what could we do better next time with this case?
Well, again, I'm coming back to what I called the okay. Let's start with since
Well, briefly, I mean,
since 2001, we had around more than 1,000 prosecutions in Europe of terrorist networks or crimes. Okay, there's all the people involved in these cases represent roughly 5,000 individuals, and these 5,000 individuals will become involved in other cases. They were in the past, and we know they will in the future.
So you need more people, more money to follow them? Is that what it is?
To follow them and to find a framework, a legal framework to deal with these people.
But you need more money. I mean, I guess, isn't the question...
First, you need more money.
Are
Indeed,
governments
indeed.
investing enough in Europe? Is the French government investing enough right
Not
now?
enough on that, because this is really the key. You arrested someone. You sometimes condemned someone to prison. He finished his term in prison. Then he become again involved in terrorism, and that happens,
So this
for
is not
example,
the
3 or 4
follow-up.
times. The follow-up on these people, the serial terrorists. This is something we need to really focus on. The serial terrorists that we have here in Europe.
Okay, I want to get, there's one more issue I want to ask you about in the little time we have left. In Northern Africa right now, Al-Qaeda's branch there, in English it's called Akim, Al-Qaeda and Islamic Maghreb. They have kidnapped, I believe they're holding 6 French hostages right now. They believe they could be in northern Mali, and they're using this kidnapping to raise money. This is a massive way, I assume, of financing terrorist networks right now. Kidnaps,
This
ransom.
is today in the world probably the most issue of concern regarding terrorism financing.
How much money are they getting from kidnapping?
Since 2008, with our estimates are that they have gained more than $50 million.
$50 million.
$50 million.
And where's the
So
rest?
much more than Al Qaeda Central when it was really active.
And where's the rest of the money coming? So kidnapping, ransom.
Okay.
What's another source of income?
Crime or drug dealing,
Drug trafficking,
drug
which is much less than they
much
get
less,
from.
much less.
So we're going to see more of this kidnapping, perhaps, as they need more cash.
The first source of income for this group is kidnapping. They will continue. There's a real business today active in that part of the world. Not only the terrorist group, but the intermediaries that are making money between the states and the group itself. There's a whole business that exists.
It's an enterprise. It's a corporate enterprise in a sense.
It's
Very briefly, in the little time we have left right now, do you think Al-Qaeda has been weakened as a result, first of killing bin Laden, but also the general trend stepping up tougher anti-terrorism laws?
The fact is, Al-Qaeda Central, as a hierarchical organization, doesn't exist anymore. It has been replaced by affiliates or by individuals jihadists.
Such as we've seen in...
And the threat is comparatively greater than in the past because the threat is today diffused and decentralized.
More diffuse. And unfortunately, Jean-Charles Blizzard, we're going to have to leave it there. Terrorist expert, also expert on financing, leaving it on a slightly negative note that Al-Qaeda as a monolithic bloc, not as strong, but the individual people are as strong as ever, and that's still a great threat. You've been watching the interview here on France 24. Thanks again.